Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to the video. In this video, I'm going to be completely welding up the control arms that I just made for the front suspension on the Baja. So once this whole quarantine thing set in, I decided that I should kind of take a step back and do some final welding on some of these front suspension parts to kind of get caught up, because at this point I had just been tacking everything and making everything temporary. So I started tearing apart everything in the front end, and I've actually been doing this for a couple of weeks already. And you can see here I've got both of the upper control arms already solid welded, and I've spray painted them. And I've also got the front spindles, which I've spray painted. And I've also, worth noting, down at the bottom here, I added this little tiny hole on both ends as a weep hole. And that's a little hole for water to drain out, so that if you're out behind and you get some water down inside there, it can run out. So I drilled those holes and then I spray painted these. These I spray painted with Steel It Black. And these I spray painted with Rust-Oleum just satin black paint. You can see they look pretty similar. There is a little bit of a difference. Not a huge difference, but a little bit. I'm just kind of experimenting with it at this point. I know that the Steel It is better, but the Steel It is also $20 a can. And this Rust-Oleum satin paint is like $4 a can, so I don't want to go broke with spray paint. So I've been experimenting with the two right now. But either way, those are the upper control arms spindles. I have one of the lower control arms right here, which is ready to be welded. And if we go up the stairway to heaven here, to the top of the loft, here I have the other lower control arm, and it's already been solid welded, and it's already been spray painted. I spray painted this yesterday, so it's pretty much good to go at this point. So there's actually a lot that comes into play when you solid weld these control arms. So I decided I would do a video on one of them as I weld it, so that as I come across these things that happens, I can show you guys how I deal with it. Some of it how I prevent it, and some of it that I can't prevent, how I deal with it after the fact. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go downstairs, I'm gonna set up the time-lapse camera, and I'm gonna start TIG welding. And this will probably be a solid day of TIG welding. My TIG welder is air-cooled, so I can't just sit down and weld these things start to finish. I have to go until the torch gets really, really hot, and then I have to let it cool a little bit, and I'll take a bunch of breaks. But I'm gonna set that all up, TIG all that stuff, and then when I'm done TIGging it, before I switch to the MIG welder, we'll go over a couple of things. Alright, so the majority of the TIG welding is done. I've got a little bit more to do, and I want to show you exactly what I've done so far and what the next little piece that I need to TIG on is. So I've TIGged all of the edges around here, tops up here, around the inside here. I've TIG welded all of that stuff, and that was pretty straightforward. I have added the spacers for the shocks and a little washer in there to give me a little bit of extra space, because when I weld this up, this is going to draw together a little bit. I also have, this is the piece that kind of holds these two bushings at the proper distance. I've got that bolted in place. And then I have the high misalignment spacers in here for where the spindle bolts in. And if you can see, I also have shims. There's a shim on this end, and there's a shim on that end. And that kind of pushes these out a little bit too much, so that by the time you do all the welding and it shrinks a little bit, it should, when you take the spacers out, fit just the two misalignment spacers in there pretty good. That's the same reason that I have the washer in here, is to push it out a little bit too much, so that by the time all the welding's done and everything shrinks a little bit, and you go to reinstall this without the washer, it should fit pretty well. And bear in mind, even though I have these all set in here with spacers, everything is still going to shrink. When I'm done welding this up, I'll have to hammer this out, and these two bushings will pull in together, and depending on how much they pull in, I might have to press them out a little bit so that it still fits within the brackets on the chassis. Now, what I'm adding on this control arm, which I didn't on my first build, is on the bushings here, rather than have all of this structure and then come down to just the single wall strength of the bushing here, I'm actually making these, which I'll clamp on here, and then I'll TIG weld all the way around these. And that's going to kind of just wrap this strap around the bushing and add all sorts of strength. And the main reason that I'm doing that is, those of you who have been watching this channel for a while remember when I had this Baja on the trail, and that tab, which wasn't fully welded on, broke, and the control arm pulled away, and it kind of pivoted this way, and it pivoted on that bushing back there, and it was just that little single wall bushing, and that bushing got a little bit distorted. And I remember thinking at that time that that was kind of a weak point, the weakest point of that entire control arm. So since this chassis that I'm building now is supposed to be bigger, stronger, badder, all that stuff, then I decided I needed to add some strength here. So I'm going to clamp these on, I'll center them up there, clamp them on, and I'm going to TIG weld all the way around there. And then I'm going to take out the MIG welder, and I'm going to use the MIG welder on parts like this, because this is 1/4 inch. This is 1/8 inch, but this is 1/4 inch. And although I could TIG it, and TIGging it would be a little bit better, it's hard for me to TIG 1/4 inch. It takes a lot out of my TIG welder, so I'm just going to run these with the MIG. Okay guys, I don't think you probably could have seen this in the time-lapse video. Everything is welded on here at this point. This piece, I've taken the bolts and the spacers out of here, and I've taken the bolts and the spacers out of the front, and as I was welding different pieces, I could feel the tension getting tighter or looser depending on which way I was welding it. As an example, when I had the spacer in here and I welded the seams inside here, that heat draws this in. So it pulled these two tabs in, and then that spacer in here was really, really tight. But then I loosened up the nuts here because I knew that when I welded these pieces here, that was going to apply heat on this side and it was going to pull them out. Wherever you're welding it or heating it, that's where it's going to shrink it and it's going to pull it that way. So by the time I was done, this spacer was actually a little bit loose because the last weld that I did was this one and this one, so they had a tendency to pull those out. And I did that in that order on purpose because I would rather have these pulled a little bit out, because when I bolt this together, the bolts will just pull that back in and snug it up against the bushings. But at one point, this piece was actually flopping around loose because when I was TIGging everything, it had heated up this side a little bit, which caused these two legs to pull out a little bit. So this was a little bit loose. But then when I came at it with the MIG, and I actually welded these pieces, because this piece that wraps around through here is 1/4 inch. So I threw all sorts of heat in here. And when I did that, it then has the opposite effect, and it heats all this up, and then it pulls these two pieces in. So now I've got all the bolts taken out of this piece, and I can't even move it at all. I'm gonna have to hammer it out of there because these two pieces are pulling themselves in now. And what's gonna happen is I'm gonna hammer this out of here, and even though I had this in place, as soon as I pop this out, these two legs are gonna snap in probably about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm gonna have to put this on the press and press it back out to where it was originally so that it fits right in the tabs that I welded on the frame. So I'm gonna pop this out right now. I mean, it's not just a little bit snug in there, it's extremely tight in there. There's a lot of pressure pulling this in. So I don't think you guys will be able to see that, but if I put that up, it's a solid 1/8 inch. Like, I can't put that back in there now. It's a solid 1/8 inch that this piece has squeezed in. And that would make it really, really, really difficult putting it back into the tabs in the frame. So I'll end up pushing this out with my press upstairs. Alright guys, I'm almost done here. I'm getting pretty tired. It's pretty late at night, but that's not your problem, it's mine. Let me pop the camera off the tripod there and show you what I got going on here. I know this is the piece that needs to fit inside there because this is the piece that I used to jig it up for the chassis. So this needs to be able to fit right inside there, and right now it's missing by about 1/8 of an inch. So I've got it set up in my hydraulic press here. I've got this bar going through the assembly. I've got just a spacer here, some pads, and it runs all the way through, and then I've got a disc in here. So what it's going to do is the hydraulic press is going to push down on this, and this can't come down because it's sitting on the press itself. So what it's going to do is when I press on it, it's going to push these apart. And I'm just going to have to do this several times and then kind of take it off to the side and throw that piece in there and find out when I've gone enough, and I'll just go a little bit each time. It's a little bit time consuming, but it works because I had to do it on the other arm as well. All right, now there's my finished product, and you can see, although it took me 4 tries, now that goes in and it's nice and snug. So that's where I want it to be, because now this will bolt right into the chassis without causing any stress on the tabs and without me having to pry it in there or do anything silly like that. And I'm really happy with how it came out. Pretty good combination between the MIG welder and the TIG welder, although I do most of it with the TIG welder because the TIG welder does such a nicer job. I just use the MIG welder on the real heavy stuff. But either way, guys, thanks for watching the video. I hope it's maybe helping you with your projects a little bit. If you're making control arms or if you're just welding some stuff up, I don't know, get you thinking about what heat does to it. Or maybe you're just sitting at home and watching this video is giving you something to do. I don't know. But either way, thanks for watching the video, and I hope to see you on the next one. Take care.